Hello, everyone, and welcome. This is the O'Reilly Fluent and O'Reilly Velocity co-chairs live hangout. We're going to be discussing some questions that you all have been sending in to us as we discuss the content that our conferences are going to be covering. Just a couple of quick housekeeping notes for you. I wanted to mention that we have coming up just later this week, that's Friday, May 4th, is the deadline for the best prices for the Fluent Conference. And so you want to make sure you get in, get your ticket in. If you haven't bought one yet, get your ticket in before that deadline. And also want to mention for listeners here specifically, anyone that's listening in on our broadcast, we have a discount code for you. That's 20% off, and it's off of the gold, silver, and bronze passes for both Fluent and Velocity. That discount code is F as in Frank, V as in Victor, Q is in quilt, A is in apple. So FVQA. Make sure to note down that discount code, get 20% off the gold, silver, and bronze passes. All right, with that said, I'm going to welcome my other fellow co-chairs to the discussion. So my co-chair with me that's from the Fluent Conference is Tammy Everts. So Tammy, why don't you introduce yourself to the audience?
Hey, Kyle. Hey, James. This is me being like a talk show guest. So I'm Tammy Everts. I've spent about 10 years in working in web performance. I focus on user experience and measuring how web performance affects user experience metrics and business metrics. I'm Chief Experience Officer at SpeedCurve and a super, super happy Fluent co-chair.
Awesome. Thanks very much. And joining us from the Velocity Conference is one of the co-chairs of the Velocity Conference. That's James Turnbull. James, welcome. And why don't you share a little bit about yourself with us?
Sure. I'm James Turnbull. I'm one of the co-chairs. The others is Ina Sombra, who is enjoying herself in Hawaii and will not be able to join us. I thought that was a reasonable excuse. I've been an engineer about 20 years. I'm the CTO at a company called Empatico currently. We build educational technology for elementary school students to help build empathy skills. And I write a bunch of technical books and look after this conference.
Excellent. Thanks very much, James. It's good to have you on board. And we are missing Inez, but I'm sure she's not missing us. She's in Hawaii, so
I hope she's not thinking about us.
Hopefully not.
I would be very surprised. From looking at her Instagram, very surprised.
All right, well, let me introduce myself. My name's Kyle Simpson. Most people know me online as Getify. I work in the JavaScript space, specifically after having spent many, many years trying to learn it. I'm now dedicated to trying to help other people learn that. So I teach JavaScript through writing, through speaking, through teaching classes, both online and in person, and just trying to understand the JavaScript development space better. So that's my area of specialty, which has kind of brought me to the Fluent Conference, and I'm actually super excited to continue on in this co-chair position. I've been to every single Fluent since it started up. It's a fantastic conference, and it's great to see it growing and maturing. And I thought before we even get into some of the questions, Tammy and James, I thought maybe we could sort of tackle a question that maybe some of our audience has thought but never actually been given much of an answer to, which is why Fluent and Velocity together? I know we use this phrase better together, but I wondered if either of you have any thoughts or opinions on why these two together are indeed better. Is it just, hey, it's great to share one location and have big parties? Or is there something deeper involved? Does it say something about our space that conferences like Velocity and Fluent could pair together like this?
Well, I mean, big parties are a really good place to start, but to me, it's a really logical pairing because I went to almost every Velocity conference back when Velocity focused on front end and back end performance, and when O'Reilly made the decision to take the front end performance track and kind of poured it over to Fluent, that made a lot of sense. It's always, and I it's really difficult sometimes to figure out, well, where's that line between front end, back end? I'm not a developer, so I'm not going to start throwing around terms like full stack developer or anything like that. But so it's a way, I think, to just bridge the fact that it is really hard to divide the two and kind of say performance belongs over here and not over here. So I've been really happy with the fact that they're paired together, and we get to share some of the great speakers that kind of bridge the divide, and of course the great parties.
Great parties are not to be diminished. They are an important part of it. James, did you have any thoughts?
Basically what Tammy said. I think the both events, if you put them sort of together, represent an end-to-end experience, an end-to-end user experience for our customers and users. Starting at the sort of the web performance end and into JavaScript, and then into the back end and into systems land and into DevOps and SRE land and in web operations. We represent the entire stack from top to bottom.
I think that's right. I think you're absolutely right. And I think one of the interesting things, this kind of will segue into one of our questions actually, but one of the interesting things that's kind of a cross-cutting concern across all those disciplines that James just mentioned is that whether our job is to put a picture on a web page, or our job is to make a button spin around when you click it, or our job is to make sure that a site is reliable and being delivered as performantly as possible, or whether our job is to make sure a database is continuing to serve up in an efficient manner. Whichever part of the stack it is, the interesting cross-cutting concern is user experience. So one of our submitted questions is on that topic. The question was, can you talk a bit about the importance of the customer's experience when building a product or application? There's some obvious parts to it that I think maybe also some less obvious parts, and we should try to dig into that. But the follow-on question is, some companies have a UX team, but is it everyone's responsibility to think about customer first? Is it, or should we say, isn't it everyone's job to think that? So either one of you, if you have any thoughts on that, talk about how UX, how customer and user experience cross-cuts across the stack.
Just thinking if we want to kind of start with the front end, I could talk for days about this. So I'm trying to figure out, okay, what are the most important nuggets to mention? For years, I've just been advocating that if you touch a page in any way, whether you're in marketing, sales, business development, design, then you should care about how the page performs, how the site performs, because everything that we do affects performance. So my short answer to that question is yes, everyone should care. And fortunately, there are more and more measurement and testing tools that give the right people visibility into the right metrics so they can actually make the connection between what they've done, for example, inserting a script onto the page to track user behavior, and how that actually affects the end user experience. So there's not really any excuse anymore for people to say, oh, that's not my responsibility. That belongs to the engineers, or that belongs to our developers. There are tools out there to give everybody visibility into, even if they just care about one metric, there's probably at least one metric that they should be tracking that bears a relationship to something that they're doing on the site.
That's true. I think that does make a lot of sense. I mean, if you sort of logically break it down, every millisecond, which in and of itself, a millisecond isn't actually observable to the human eye, for example. I think it's somewhere around between 10 and 100 milliseconds or something like that. So 1 millisecond may not seem like it is an impact, but one of the things that happens a lot is that those kinds of slowdowns tend to be more systemic, and they tend to add up. And so while you may be looking at one piece and saying, is it worth the extra engineering effort to squeeze out something that no user is going to think about, that the conventional logic was always, if it's not observable to the user, don't worry about it. But I think one of the things that we're getting at here is that you have to have a more holistic view of the entire stack rather than focusing on one particular piece, because it's easy to justify or not justify a decision when you myopically focus on one piece. But if you think about it from the whole and from the perspective of the customer, those things do add up, and they do affect customers in ways that a lot of us don't even necessarily realize. I mean, we oftentimes have the benefit of living in a first world country and working on fast and reliable internet with fast and reliable power supply. And so those kinds of things don't surface to us. But even tiny, tiny little details like that somewhere within the stack can systemically add up to create a really negative customer experience for others. James, do you have thoughts on that from your side of the world?
I do, and I think you've hit the nail on the head there with the concept of what's observable to the customer. That moves really fast, and it's a different experience depending on who the customer is, their demographic, where they are, the quality of their connection, the type of browser they're using or device they're using. So that user experience is far more complex than it used to be, and that concept of what is observable to the customer, you can be very much narrow-minded about that approach. And I think that when I think about particularly observability and performance, ultimately we exist because customers want to use our products, and every one of those customers, let's say, you think about the old days, we used to debate things like average performance times, average millisecond latency. And we've started to work out that it's actually that our customers are a broad spectrum of folks, and it's actually those customers at the 99th percentile that have a terrible experience are the ones that are actually the strongest critiques of our product. So it doesn't matter whether we've got a silent majority of 99% of the people saying, "Oh, that was an okay experience." If we've got 1% of people who are like, "Oh my God, this is a terrible product," I think that sort of very holistic view, that sort of customer first view, needs to be something we sort of need to pivot to.
And I think you're right that what's happening, one of the forces that seems to be evolving and shaping the web is that we seem to be moving in a direction where a lot of those artificial barriers, whether they be geopolitical barriers like the line of a country, or they be barriers like the kinds of customers that we care about, those things seem to be being reduced. They seem to be degrading to where playing on the web really is truly playing in a global space. And even though you may think, oh, well, I only sell my little product to people that live right here in San Francisco, for example, it turns out that you might actually have a very non-trivial amount of your users who are regularly looking at and consuming your services from the other side of the world. And you may not think of them as your customers because you normally are accustomed to charging credit cards only for people in your city, but they are still your customer. They are still a constituent of the web experience that you're creating, and they still care, and therefore the experience still matters to them. And we kind of need to, I think, as a community, start having this bigger perspective, get outside of the bubble, to use the common colloquialism. We have to get outside of that bubble and start thinking about the fact that this web is this really big tent. I'm curious if either of you think you have any ideas on, because this is not necessarily a new observation that I'm suggesting or that we're talking about. It's a problem that's been around for a while, but teams seem to vary in their ability to have that self-awareness. What do you think we can do as companies and as teams to get outside of that bubble, to think about this as not just, oh, I'm hyper-localized on this one particular customer segment, but thinking about serving the entire web with everything that we do?
I think one of the interesting things, all of the best companies I've worked for that got this right were the ones that made customer satisfaction and that's sort of, whether it's an NPS score or something like that, that's actually the key metric. Like if the customers are happy, they'll buy your product, and everything cascades down from that. Your sales figures are related to your customer sat. And I think that putting that customer first, whether it be the persona in a UX experience point of view, or in your performance analysis at the back end, or the latency for transactions, thinking about that customer and those myriad of customers and their experiences, putting them first and asking them, are you happy with this? What can we do to be better? Is the right approach.
So sort of directly asking customers in various different ways, do you like us? And if you don't, or if there are things that we can do better, almost polling them. It's not just enough to latently collect the data on how fast the page load, but you're saying directly asking them for feedback, for input
Well,
on how.
not only that, but making that feedback a key strategic metric. Like it's not just how many dollars of widgets we sold, it's the user experience and the customer experience and their satisfaction with the experience of buying those widgets is equally important if we want to make a repeat transaction.
I think that's a really good point, because I think we spend a lot of time focused on how can we automate the collection of data through tools. I think what you're basically saying is we can't forget about that human component, that those people using it are actually humans and they have thoughts and opinions. Tammy, what did you think?
Just to build on that, I think you can also get there by flipping it around and look. A lot of people are very tools oriented, and everybody's got tons and tons of data. And to James's point earlier about not just looking at your averages or your medians, but looking at your 95th or 99th percentiles, and not dismissing them as like, oh, that's just outliers, but thinking like, actually, these are the people that we need to worry about. And you can build use cases around those outliers, and they might be based on some assumptions and things like that. But I think it's a really interesting empathy building exercise. There was something that I can't remember what article I was reading this in, but somebody made a really interesting point in an article about usability, where they talked about if you developing a website or an app for parents, new parents, and thinking, oh, okay, well, I'm building this app and parents are going to use it. But if you've never actually had a child, especially an infant, you don't realize how important it is to be able to do things with one hand, to do things quickly, and to not have to punch in like 50 characters with your thumb. So all the things you can do to make that transaction or that engagement simpler for that type of user. So I think it's interesting to kind of slow down and kind of build these sort of like fleshed out avatars that actually really put you in the kind of the user seat and see what their experience is actually like.
I think that's true. And I think also our entire system of interacting with users, it has been improving in its capability, but it oftentimes seems like all we're really doing is creating more fanciness for the end user, and maybe not so much focusing on how do we, for example, optimize for that use case you just talked about, Tammy, with a mom who's got, a couple of kids in one arm and is really just trying to like order some pizza or something. And we're not really creating a lot or spending a lot of thought in our time building the web around what I guess I would say would be not necessarily the common use case that's envisioned when somebody talks about talks about an app. We're still very sort of mouse centric or touchpad centric. We're still very keyboard centric for typing in text, but there are lots of other emerging thoughts around this, like, for example, voice interaction and other things, that it's not just somebody who maybe is in a wheelchair or has some other sort of physical challenge or disability. Sometimes it's just a very normally abled, person that we otherwise wouldn't identify as needing something like that, but they're in a context like you're discussing, where they need some kind of alternate way to interact. So I think that's very important, very useful.
The article that I got that use case from was I wish I could remember what it was so that I could point people towards it. But it was just really addressing the topic of accessibility, because we tend to think of accessibility within very narrow parameters. And actually, when you broaden what accessibility means, you realize that all of us have accessibility issues at some point in our lives. You break your thumbs, you do something, you have a baby, you have, you get eye drops put in because you're getting an eye exam and suddenly you can't see, but you need to use something. So there are all these different ways that using the internet is just hard for everyone. And so taking all of those into consideration and kind of just to help realize that accessibility isn't this like, oh, okay, we built this site, now let's try to shim some accessibility into it, but actually building it with accessibility in mind.
Yeah, I build software for elementary school students and teachers. And when you think about sort of building software, you think about adding features. We actually think about taking features away, because if you're a school teacher with 32 kids in your class and you want them to focus on the thing in front of them, you literally don't have time to learn an interface. You want one button that starts things and one button that stops things. You want it to be incredibly simple and intuitive, because you can't pause in front of 32 kids and puzzle out the user interface, because they don't stand still. 32 8-year-olds are an absolute handful, and we find that talking to those teachers and finding out from, like, this is what our experience of technology is. This is the experience of these products. What we want is simple, 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 and building that in from day one instead of sort of, as you said, shimming it in later.
I want to come back to what you just said. So let's put a bookmark on the whole concept of, do we want simple, simple, simple? Because there are a few questions actually that I want to dig into that more. But I just want to put kind of a bow on this part of the discussion, because what occurs to me that seems to be emerging in our conversation here is this idea that I think it was Tammy that just a moment ago said, developing this bigger sense of empathy. That's a big touchstone word for me. Empathy, being able to understand, or at least respect, even if you don't understand, somebody else's reality. Respect it and give it the attention that it deserves, even if it's so foreign to you that you can't imagine, right? So one of the things that I think maybe we could be advocating more of is that the teams that we have assembled at all these different companies have this wide array of different life experiences and life situations that happen. The I broke my thumbs kinds of situations, like you just said, we have those, but we don't seem to mine that for sources of developing empathy. It's almost like we think, well, it doesn't really matter what's happening within the people within the company. We're building this thing for the customer out there, but maybe we could be looking internally to ourselves to say, what are some of the challenges that maybe some of our employees or their immediate family members may experience with something, and use that data, if you will, as a way to begin to develop an intentional awareness around empathy. And what that leads me to then, to kind of circle back to that question that I asked at the beginning about better together. A team is better when all of those different perspectives are brought into the conversation. A team is better together. They're not better separate. It's not better if you have a company that has a whole bunch of different silos that never talk to each other, and they all handle their own little part of their reality, and they never communicate or cooperate or collaborate. And so if teams are better at doing what they do when they are together, then it seems like one of the best benefits that Fluent and Velocity bring by being together is they give that space, they extend that space for teams to gather together, not just in their own office, but at a conference, and to learn about all these different ways of slicing up the world that they're trying to serve and deliver to. I think that's exciting. I think it's very neat that you could have very different people from a company, one group of people that might be more attracted to something like the Velocity conference, and another group of people that are more attracted to a Fluent conference. But instead of them going to two separate conferences and having two separate sets of revelations and thoughts and communication and collaboration, they're at one event, and they have more opportunities to communicate with each other and with other teams that are in that similar spot. So I'm excited about that. I think that's pretty cool. And this is kind of a newer revelation for me, that better together doesn't just mean the conference, but it really means all the attendees together as well. I wanted to shift back because just a moment ago, James, you were talking about simple, and I want to test that. I want to push on that a little bit, because it does seem like there is one side of the world which wants to push for performance and optimization and reliability. And I know that both you kind of play in that world. And then there's more the world where we play in, what toys do software developers have? What new libraries, what new frameworks, what new widgets can we create to create these ever more sophisticated and, in reality, ever more complex and sometimes slow to load experiences? What do you think about the tension between that? Because developers seem to almost be drunk on, here's this new thing that somebody just invented and it's so amazing and I just can't wait to roll this out, versus the side of the house that wants to say, wait a minute, now we just doubled our page load. And what does that mean for our ability to continue to serve it fast and also to serve it reliably?
I'm not sure that they're at odds. So realistically, I'm a huge fan of what a couple of folks call choose boring technology, like, innovate in small pieces, largely because of stability and reliability and a bunch of things like that. But I do think that using the right technology for the job and potentially using more sophisticated technology, or choosing to build something on a cutting edge isn't necessarily a bad thing, depending on what you expose to the end user, right? So if you set a set of, I think SpeedCurve would call them budgets for your expectations around what that user experience should be, and you trial out 3 brand new libraries that are massively whiz bang and have really cool features, and you weight the relevant criteria, and one of them is, well, our performance budget is this, and this new library, it's really cool, but it adds like 10 milliseconds of latency. Okay, well, that drives it out of the running. I think it's when you look at that in a reasoned kind of way.
Yeah, it's funny that you mentioned performance budgets, because that's actually, I was thinking the same thing. Like, just in the context of, I think I totally get the wanting to explore new technologies and just sort of like, just, it's like being in a toy store, right? And that's fun. Another thing that's fun is having targets like performance budgets for all of your different components, and seeing, for all the customers that I talk to who use SpeedCurve products, they love budgets because that's the gamified aspect of what they're doing. Like, it's seeing if they can build what they want to build and still stay within these target budgets. So you can still have fun and do all the edgy things that you want to do, but and still, actually be performant and all of those things.
Tammy, can you give us some specifics on that? Because I know that is the world that you focus so much on. Can you give some specifics to the audience about maybe tools that they use, that someone can use to effectively create that perspective on their app, where here's the range that you can play in. So be really creative, but make sure you stay within the range. I mean, I know there's one thing to say, oh, I create a performance budget, but what are the nuts and bolts of that? How does somebody get started if that's what they want to bring to their team?
Yeah. So Tim Cadlick wrote some really great blog posts about performance budget. So I don't know if people are familiar with him. He's actually going to be speaking at Fluent. And he's really tall, so you can't miss him if you want to ask him questions when you're there. So I recommend people look up Tim Cadlick, Kadlec, performance budgets. And we've written a couple posts about performance budgets on the SpeedCurve blog as well. So there's a few different ways you can do it. You can use a public, free public tool like Web Page Test, and which kind of breaks down your page elements, and you can see, how much is HTML, how much is images, and so forth. And you can just kind of manually say, well, we want to be within 1,000 kilobytes for images, or under 2 megs for total page size. Or you can get very, very specific and granular with JavaScript and things like that. And so there's that. You can build your own tools that let you do that. And then there's like paid tools, and I don't want to seem like I'm shilling SpeedCurve here, but there are paid tools that let you actually build your performance budgets right into the tool, and then get alerts whenever you exceed your budgets, that sort of thing. And you can get really pretty graphs that show you when you're above and below your targets. So there's all these different ways you can do it, and it can be as granular as you want it to be, but it's a great way of showing people in your org, like say marketing. I was talking to a company once, I'm definitely not going to name any names, where they were I was talking with marketing people, and they were like, suddenly their pages were really slow, and they didn't know why, because nobody had ever taught them how to use tools like Web Page Test or other page measurement tools, or how to create budgets or anything like that. And it only took 30 seconds to show them, oh, the problem is this animated GIF you have on your homepage as your hero image is 5 megs. So if you had a performance budget in place that wouldn't allow you to do this, or it would allow you to do it, but then it would immediately send you an alert saying, woo woo, you need to look at that, then that's a really helpful tool. And it's kind of what I was alluding to earlier when I was saying that there's no excuse for not having a visibility for different people in different parts of the org. Like, marketing should know when they've exceeded a budget, because they've inserted a bunch of scripts in their tag manager, or inserted a really huge image onto their homepage, or they're not optimizing their product images or what have you.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting stuff, and I appreciate you sharing some of those thoughts and resources. I would echo what Tammy was saying about Tim Kadlec. Fantastic guy. I've been around the O'Reilly conference space and the web community for a long time, and is really fantastic. So definitely, listeners, check him out. It occurred to me just as you were speaking, Tammy, that some of those tools you were mentioning, some of them are on the paid end of the spectrum, some are on the free, and one that I just it just came out was the most recent release of NPM, which is the package manager that people tend to use in the JavaScript ecosystem. The most recently released NPM 6, by default now, when you publish a new package, it gives you a list of output that tells you the kilobyte size of each of the different parts of your dependencies and the overall size of the package and its compressed size and all of that. That's info that you could have gotten before, but you would have had to go and dig for. And now they're just dumping that sort of report for you. It's not like it's a warning like, oh, you're bad, but it is an awareness thing. And I can imagine that people will even take stuff as simple and free like that and begin to monitor the output of that and check. And it probably wouldn't be hard at all to just simply scrape the text that is outputted from NPM publish and just track over time how big are our packages getting. So there's the macro level stuff like what's being delivered on the web page, but at a micro level, we can even think about things like the size of the libraries that we're using to build our system. So
we actually have a test that does that. So we have a test, well, a series of tests that measure the size of the NPM packages after any change, and if they change via a series of percentages, then you get a warning or a critical error, or in some cases you can't deploy unless you can demonstrate like, okay, you've just added like 200 kilobytes to this. What's going on here? Sure. And your CI will fail if just because you never know what happens. It's not even a critique of developers. It's just like stuff happens, and it'd be great to know if it happened before you deployed it to all your users.
It's interesting that we've had a culture for a long time that it's okay to fail a build if a unit test fails. Like, oops, we introduced a bug and now a unit test is failing. That's cool for the CI to like fail. But it seems relatively less common, or maybe just less talked about, for a company to adopt the same kind of almost hardline perspective on performance or experience related things. Hey, the whole build failed because, sorry, the package size grew by 3%, and that's unacceptable. That's out of budget. It's one thing to get a report and have a manager be saying, oh, yeah, we really are kind of like bloating the user experience. It's another thing when the build just literally says, nope, sorry, you fail. you cannot go forward. Do not pass go. So, maybe that's a really healthy thing. I think it's cool. James, since you were just chatting about some of that stuff, I know you have a lot of experience with companies, and I'm sure that you've tackled things like this before. I was just curious if you had any stories that come to mind about companies trying to tackle some of these challenges, adopt some of these new or different ways of thinking about things.
I think the key thing when I do a lot of consulting in this sort of space, and particularly around technology choice and buy versus build, and I think the key thing I always tell people is there are definitely a series of rules. It doesn't matter whether you're looking at a front-end framework or you're looking at a programming language choice or a compute platform or a CI tool. There are a series of sort of rules you can apply every single time, and they include things like the operational complexity of something, or the hireability of resources that have the skill set required. So if you would like to deploy, let's say, React, it's probably a really great time to hire React engineers, but it may not be the most awesome time to hire Angular engineers. Or if you want to deploy Elm, then the pool of people who use Elm is probably smaller than the pool of people who use React. So there's lots of even non-technological, non-tangible constraints that are worth looking at in those situations, and performance is definitely another one of those things where you go, here is a set of constraints we have, like the app performance with this level of latency, or transaction speed is this, or volumes are this. Whatever we choose can't deviate from that, or can't modify too far from that.
Very cool. That's very useful stuff. I wanted to just provide kind of one other perspective on this, going just a few bits back in our conversation today, on that whole question of uh, what is the expected experience, or what does a user want to get out of your application. One of the things that is kind of a pet peeve of mine is that it feels like we have built our systems and our processes to assume that the most important factor in deciding what experience should be delivered to a user is not actually the user's preference or even the user's context, but just simply device and environment capability. So, for example, if my mobile phone supports WebGL, then almost every site out there that uses WebGL assumes that because my device supports it, that I want the WebGL enabled version of that experience. Another example might be Retina images. Because my computer has a Retina screen, for example, that must mean that when I visit your website, I want the Retina 4x resolution version of that image, because that's, obviously I as the user want the best possible thing I can get. When our context is fast internet and reliable power supply and good lighting and all of that stuff, those assumptions work. But as soon as you take someone like me and put me in a different context where now my phone is on 2% battery and it's raining and it's 9 o'clock at night and I'm in a foreign country on metered bandwidth that I'm paying for, all of a sudden my context is totally different. Even though my device still has the capability to show WebGL, that's probably not what I want. And that sort of information and that sort of perspective is not likely to be caught. At least it seems like it would be harder to catch from these sorts of tools that are automated around performance budgets, unless those tools are trying to simulate a lot more of those real world things. Like, you can't just have one profile. You got to have lots of different profiles, and you need to really almost be asking, like James, I think, said with the 99%, what's the worst case? The worst case is that somebody has really low bandwidth and it's raining and it's late at night and whatever. What's our performance profile look there? What's our complexity budget look like when we're serving to that kind of user? Because that's not just the, we don't really care about that user. That's the same primary user who just took a trip and now they happen to be in a different scenario. And that's one thing that I hope that we are maybe as a community going to start to talk more about and have more conversations about. Because at the end of the day, user preference ought to trump all these other discussions. Whether my device can do it, whether you want me to have that experience, those are all secondary to what I want, what the user wants.
Yeah, I think that's we're probably at the very early stages of that. You see it, video conferences is a good example, right? Like it's sampling the quality of your connection and making decisions about what it presents to you based on the quality of that connection. I'm not close enough to the front end stuff to work out how far we are off that, but certainly there's movements in a bunch of different spaces where that's a consideration, or it's being, we could call it smart.
It's funny because when we add new features that allow a system to detect more about the environment, my favorite story about this is recently, over the last year and a half or something, recently there was a push in the standards body to add the battery status API to the web spec so that JavaScript applications could query the battery status. And theoretically, if somebody's battery on their device was low or draining quickly, then theoretically that web application would throttle down what it was doing or shift more of the load to the server or something like that. It seems like a really good idea. Make the JavaScript application be, as you just said, James, smarter. Unfortunately, lots of times when we create automated mechanisms for the system to monitor and adjust itself, those are perfect grounds for people to abuse. And the battery status API, while it was great in its best use case, was also really awful in its worst use case, because what apparently happened was that you were able to very reliably fingerprint somebody's device and track them based upon nuanced characteristics like how fast their battery would drain given certain, long-running operations. So the code maliciously could try to run an operation, monitor at a very fine-grained level how the battery worked under those conditions, and then be able to track you doing that across different websites and other things like that. And so even something that seems like it's so good to let us be smarter, unfortunately can be used. And at the end of the day, what I come back to is no system will ever be as smart as my preference. My preference to say what I know about my scenario, I need to be able to express that in some way. It's nice to have automated systems, and we have the whole side of the world that's being represented by Velocity that kind of trumpets how great that is. But at the end of the day, I think we still need to ask, how do we ask the user what they want, what they care about? I wanted to shift gears for just a moment because one of the questions uses an acronym that I have heard, but I don't actually know fully what it stands for, and I'm hoping maybe one or both of you can clue me in here. What is an SRE? And what does that mean to my team? What do I need one of those? Is it something I buy and install? What is an SRE?
An SRE is I guess, a site reliability engineer.
So it's a person. It's not
a person.
It's not a program.
Role, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. It's realistically a job function, I guess, rather than a person. Like all of these things, it's kind of a way of thinking as well as a job title. It's a very Google-centric way of thinking about the world, and Google has sort of championed the sort of development of sort of SRE methodology. You can think about an SRE as sort of an operations person or a sysadmin who solves problems by writing code primarily, rather than changing configuration.
Okay.
That's a very brute force definition, and somebody currently on the internet, probably a Googler, is going to tweet shortly and tell me that I'm wrong. But broadly speaking, it's an engineer who specializes in solving reliability problems with their code instead of solving feature-based problems.
Got it. All right. And how does that impact, like, when we say reliability, what is the relationship between reliability and performance? Is there one? I mean, Tammy, maybe you talk about that sort of stuff at SpeedCurve often.
Sorry, can you just say that again? I didn't quite catch what the question was.
So SRE being site reliability engineer, what's the relationship between somebody who focuses on reliability and someone else on the team or some other role on the team which is focusing on the performance? How closely related would you say those two hats are?
Pretty close. I mean, every company is different, but often there'll be like a senior performance engineer or somebody with those types of words in their title, and they'll work closely with site reliability engineer, or the SRE will report to them. It really just depends on how the team's constructed. So it's kind of like taking performance and looking at it with the broadest possible, definition to include reliability, to include speed, and more and more to include accessibility.
It seems to me, although this would be your space of expertise, but it seems to me that performance problems can sometimes be surfaced as, oh, the user feels like this thing is not working. But sometimes the performance problem is, oh my God, my server's about to crash because our performance is not good. And that is going to directly lead to a reliability problem. So it seems like an SRE and a performance engineer, that either needs to be the same people or the same team, or they need to be closely speaking with each other because it seems like they can impact each other.
Yeah. So like say if you have like really big retail companies, like around Black Friday, they'll have, kind of war room situations to make sure their site doesn't go down at all, ideally, but like for no more than milliseconds if it does happen. And in the war room, you would have an SRE, you'd have performance engineers, you'd have a whole bunch of people just monitoring literally everything.
Really good. I'm glad to get that. Did you have thoughts on that, James?
I was just going to add, like, I think it's probably think about a reliability as availability, but realistically, reliability is about providing a reliable, trustworthy, consistent platform that other engineers can build better features faster, do faster things on. Essentially, a site reliability engineer provides that consistency of platform that allows a performance engineer to take risks, do experiments, make things faster and better, without presenting, whilst presenting a consistent and quality user experience to the end user.
I think at the end of the day, that almost more than anything is, it kind of comes back to what we've been talking about this whole discussion today, which is at the end of the day, our job is to serve the user. And if we need to create specialties and focuses where your direct job may not be impacting the actual bytes that the user is interacting with in the web page, but is helping other members of the team do that well, that seems just as important, if not more important. So I'm thankful for that. I didn't have that perspective before hearing both of your thoughts on that. So that's good. As we begin to kind of wrap up, I just wanted to ask kind of one last broad question, pulling back. Both of you are deeply related to O'Reilly and to the O'Reilly conference scene. We've talked about Fluent and Velocity and the Better Together theme. But I just kind of want to wrap back up by asking if either of you have any thoughts on what, if somebody's listening now and they've been teetering or they've been thinking, I don't know if I can convince a boss to send me to this conference. What would you say is like the one, maybe two, but like the one big thing that you're thinking that someone listening in is going to get out of coming to this upcoming event here in a month or two?
So many things. To me, the great thing about O'Reilly conferences is you're just rarely ever going to get this many experts underneath one roof. And everybody at O'Reilly conferences, speakers, keynoters, everyone's so accessible that just to have access to this breadth and depth of expertise in one area is amazing. And also being able to, there are a lot of conferences out there that focus on, like, they're single track and they focus on, maybe a specific technology or a specific kind of goal. And those are great. I think those conferences are super valuable and they definitely have a place in the whole conference ecosystem. But if your conference time or budget is limited and you really want to get that end-to-end insight, and even if you only go to the talks that are relevant, or mostly go to the talks that are relevant to your very specific interests, you're still going to get a flavor of that context. You're going to get a feel for where you sit within the entire ecosystem. And it's a chance to kind of, sit in on another talk that might be outside your comfort zone or outside your interest zone. So it's a really great way to bolster the skills that you have, but then dabble in some other areas. And because, most people are curious and always want to learn, this is a great way to do that.
That's great. Thank you for that.
I totally agree with Tammy there. The thing I've always thought about the Velocity conference for me specifically is that it's a community. And some of the problems we really face are challenging. They're hard to solve. They're hard to sort of even reason about. And it's amazing to be able to go somewhere and have a conversation with someone who's, we did that last year and this is what went wrong. Oh my God, don't press the big red button. And be able to have that conversation with somebody who provides so much context and provides so much sort of comfort that someone else is trying to solve this problem, or even it's like, okay, can we schedule like an hour to talk about how you did this implementation? Like what went wrong? What should we care about? Like, can you tell us what the traps for young players were? And I hear whenever I'm sitting down at lunch, I always laugh because I hear these conversations where people is like, yeah, we tried this, and everyone goes, no, you shouldn't have tried that. You should try this. And the other person goes, no, we tried that too, and it went. You see these sort of long, involved conversations where somebody is like, somebody you can literally learning at not even at a session, just sitting at lunch, learning how to do something. And I love that community aspect of O'Reilly events, and particularly as Tammy said, is very vendor agnostic. I don't have a product to sell. Most of the people attending, we are very strongly opposed to sort of sales pitch style talks. We want people to tell us about their case study, about their problem, about how they used a tool in a real world way to solve an issue or to build something amazing. Because that to me is the best way to sell a product or sell a tool is to show the results and the outcomes. So, that non-vendor specific thing is where, you are getting people's honest assessment and their honest experiences about the tools and technology they use, about the processes, about leadership and management, and about the the aspects of building products, building engineering teams, engineering process. And I think that's an amazing sort of community to be part of.
And just to kind of add to that, sorry, you said something, James, that reminded me, yeah, the process side of thing and things that, people tend to fluff off as like, oh, those are soft skills, like how to work with teams and do all of that. They're not soft skills. They're actually like really hard skills. And they're things that everybody needs to learn how to do. And so just having the luxury of having a multi-track conference where those options are also available to you. And we have a lot of good talks on both the Velocity side and the Fluent side around that.
What I love that I'm hearing from both of you is that what these events do best, and I definitely agree with this, what these events do best is they bring people together for these conversations, that it's not just about content. I mean, let's be honest, if it was just about content, we could put all of the stuff that was going to be put into these conferences into blog posts or online videos and just put it out there for free or sell it or whatever. And let's just not even worry about the whole conference thing. The reason why the conference matters, the reason why that experience matters, and the reason why somebody listening should get excited about an opportunity, convince their boss to have that opportunity to come, is because you get to connect with people. And I think it reminds us that on the other end of all these pixels that we are creating and slinging around the web are people. That fundamentally the web is about people expressing their thoughts to other people. And I think maybe that's one of the most important responsibilities that we have as a set of events, is to have a responsible, broad-ranging conversation about those things in the context of people. Like, the content is great, but if we forget that people are doing it, then what is the whole point? So I'm glad for that. I feel tremendously privileged for that. Thank you very much, Tammy and James, for your thoughts today. I've learned some stuff already, so it's pretty cool. I'm even more excited about the event. But I thank you for your thoughts and having this conversation. I want to remind listeners that we have an upcoming deadline, the best price for conference tickets. That is this Friday, May 4th. So make sure you convince your boss and get that ticket purchased by May 4th to get the best prices before those go up. And also, as a special offer to the listeners of this discussion, we have this discount code for you. It is 20% off the gold, silver, and bronze passes for both Fluent and Velocity. So it doesn't get much better than that. This is a fantastic discount. It is F as in Frank, V as in Victor, Q as in quilt or queen or whatever keyword you want to use, and then A as in Apple, FVQA. Use that discount code. Get your 20% off. Get your tickets today. We are so excited and honored that you all have listened in, and can't wait to see all of you in San Jose coming up here in a little over a month. So for me and Tammy and James, thanks very much, and we'll see you all next time.
Cheers. Thank you, everyone.